Step out of the pool, hands where I can see them. I'm sorry, what? I said step out of the pool, now. This is my house. I live here. A neighbor called about someone trespassing in the pool area. You fit the description. I'm not trespassing, this is my home, my pool. The homeowner is described as a white woman in her 60s. You don't match that description. The neighbor is mistaken. I'm Director Camille Washington. This is my residence. I've lived here for 8 years. Right. And I'm the mayor. Out of the pool. I'm the director of the FBI's Philadelphia field office. My credentials are inside. I don't care if you're the Queen of England. You're trespassing on private property. Officer Mason Kane had been with the Montgomery County Police Department for 9 months when he walked into a situation that would obliterate his career before it truly began and cost the county $4,000. He was 24 years old, fresh from the academy, young enough that he should have asked for backup before acting, inexperienced enough that he should have questioned his assumptions. One Saturday afternoon in June, in the backyard of a luxury home in Lower Merion Township, he received a call about suspicious activity at a private residence, saw a black woman swimming in a pool, and decided she had to be the problem. What Kane did next, refusing to verify ownership, ignoring witness statements, and arresting an FBI director in her own backyard while she was in a swimsuit, would become proof that rookie overconfidence combined with racial bias creates catastrophic consequences for everyone involved. A black woman in her late 50s, Director Camille Washington, was floating on an inflatable raft in her backyard pool on a quiet Saturday afternoon. Her sunglasses rested on top of her head. A glass of iced tea sat on the pool deck next to a folded towel. No crime, no trespassing, no disturbance, just a federal executive relaxing in her own backyard after a brutal week of congressional testimony. But Officer Kane saw her through a filter so warped by assumptions about who belongs in million-dollar homes that he couldn't imagine a black woman as the legitimate owner of a stone and glass estate in one of Pennsylvania's wealthiest neighborhoods. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. The house sits on Waverly Road in Lower Merion Township, Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. It's the kind of street where properties start at $2 million and climb from there. Stone facades, manicured lawns, circular driveways, privacy hedges thick enough to block views from the road. Old money and new money living side by side in careful suburban silence. The backyard pools are heated. The security systems are professionally monitored. The neighborhood watch is vigilant, sometimes aggressively so. Lower Merion Township has a reputation. Median household income north of $12,000. Top-ranked schools, property values that have climbed steadily for 3 decades. It's the kind of place where residents know their landscapers by first name but not their neighbors, where everyone waves but few people actually talk, where diversity is celebrated in principle but scrutinized in practice. The Washington property is a 4,200-square-foot contemporary design with floor-to-ceiling windows, a 3-car garage, and professionally maintained gardens. The pool is kidney-shaped, heated year-round, surrounded by limestone pavers and teak furniture. A privacy fence runs the perimeter of the backyard, 8 feet high, painted charcoal gray to match the house trim. From the street, you can't see the pool at all. You'd have to be in an upstairs window 3 houses away to catch a glimpse through the trees. It was 3:47 p.m. on a Saturday in mid-June, temperature hovering at 89 degrees, the kind of afternoon where anyone with a pool would be in it. The street was quiet. Most neighbors were inside with air conditioning running. A few teenagers rode bikes at the far end of the cul-de-sac. Lawnmowers hummed in the distance. Someone was grilling. The smell of charcoal and lighter fluid drifted over privacy fences. Sprinklers clicked rhythmically on timer systems. It was the kind of Saturday afternoon where nothing dramatic typically happens in neighborhoods where people pay premium prices for peace and predictability. Director Camille Washington had been the FBI's Philadelphia field office director for 6 years. 6 years overseeing counterterrorism operations, organized crime investigations, public corruption cases, and cyber threat assessments across eastern Pennsylvania, Delaware, and South Jersey. Her office managed 350 special agents and 200 support staff. Her jurisdiction included some of the most complex federal investigations in the Northeast. She'd spent 28 years with the Bureau before that. 8 years in the Counterintelligence Division tracking foreign intelligence operatives working cases that involved Russian SVR officers, Chinese MSS agents, and Iranian intelligence networks operating on U.S. soil. She'd been part of the team that identified and expelled 12 Russian intelligence officers posing as diplomats in 2016. 7 years in the Criminal Investigative Division working on violent crime and gang task forces, leading operations that dismantled MS-13 cells in 3 states and resulted in 84 federal indictments. 6 years as a legal attaché in London coordinating international investigations, serving as the FBI's primary liaison with British intelligence services, Scotland Yard, and Europol. She'd worked counter-terrorism cases that prevented 3 planned attacks on U.S. targets in Europe. 5 years as assistant director for the Office of Partner Engagement, managing relationships with state and local law enforcement across 22 states, training police chiefs on federal cooperation protocols, and building intelligence sharing networks that improved joint operations nationwide. 2 years as a field agent in Chicago, working undercover narcotics cases that resulted in 47 federal indictments and the seizure of $23 million in drug proceeds. She'd worn a wire. She'd testified in federal court 31 times. She'd been threatened, followed, and once had her car firebombed in a grocery store parking lot. She'd survived it all through preparation, discipline, and the ability to stay calm when others panicked. She'd testified before Congress on domestic terrorism threats, briefing senators on white supremacist networks and homegrown violent extremism. She'd briefed the Attorney General on election security vulnerabilities and foreign interference operations. She'd coordinated with Homeland Security on border enforcement operations and human trafficking investigations. She'd spoken at law enforcement conferences on implicit bias, use of force, and community policing. Her colleagues called her relentless. Her subordinates called her fair, but demanding. The media called her one of the most effective federal law enforcement executives in the country. Police chiefs who'd worked with her said she had zero tolerance for incompetence and even less for discrimination. Washington had graduated from Howard University with a degree in criminal justice, then Georgetown Law, where she'd been on law review and graduated in the top 10% of her class. She'd clerked for a federal judge in the District of Columbia before joining the FBI at 26. She'd received the Attorney General's Award for Distinguished Service twice. She'd been promoted through merit, through results, through 28 years of proving her competence in situations where others doubted her before she opened her mouth. At 54 years old, Camille Washington was exactly where she'd worked to be, respected, feared when necessary, and trusted with overseeing federal law enforcement operations in one of the nation's most complex jurisdictions. That Saturday, Washington had spent the morning testifying before a closed congressional committee about cybersecurity threats. She'd flown back to Philadelphia, arrived home at 2:30 p.m., changed into a black one-piece swimsuit, grabbed a book and iced tea, and headed to her pool. She'd been swimming laps for 20 minutes before settling onto the inflatable raft to read. The June heat felt therapeutic after a week of fluorescent lights and hostile questioning from legislators who'd never investigated anything in their lives. She wore sunglasses and had her hair pulled back. Her FBI credentials were inside on the kitchen counter next to her service weapon, both locked in the biometric safe she kept near the door. Her phone sat on the pool deck, screen dark. She looked like what she was, a professional woman enjoying her own pool on a Saturday afternoon. She'd done nothing to attract attention. She'd spoken to no one. She was 50 feet from the nearest property line, completely invisible from the street, fully within her rights to exist in her own backyard. But to someone 3 houses down, Camille Washington's presence in that pool was suspicious enough to warrant a 911 call. And that person had decided to do something about it. Officer Mason Kane was 24 years old. He'd been with the Montgomery County Police Department for 9 months after graduating from the police academy with above-average test scores but minimal field experience. He was enthusiastic, eager to prove himself, but deeply concerned about making mistakes that would embarrass him in front of more experienced officers. His training officer described him as results-oriented but sometimes lacking in critical thinking skills and community sensitivity. In 9 months, Kane had compiled a record that should have triggered additional mentoring. 3 complaints. 3. 2 of them involved allegations that he'd stopped black residents in predominantly white neighborhoods and demanded proof they lived there. A man jogging in Gladwin was detained and questioned about where he was running to. A teenager walking her dog in Ardmore was asked for identification and proof of residence. Both complaints ended identically. Counseling sessions Kane attended but never internalized, with supervisors noting his tendency to assume people of color didn't belong in affluent areas. Kane had a pattern. He responded to calls involving black residents in wealthy neighborhoods with immediate suspicion. He asked for proof of belonging before verifying whether a crime had occurred. He escalated situations that required de-escalation. One complaint involved a black family moving into a home in Bryn Mawr. Kane responded to a neighbor's call about suspicious activity, which turned out to be a moving truck. He demanded the family produce a lease or deed before allowing them to continue unloading furniture. The family had complied, stunned, and filed a formal complaint the next day. Kane received a written reprimand and 4 hours of implicit bias training. Another complaint involved an older black man sitting in his car outside a country club. Kane approached with his hand on his weapon, demanded ID, and ran a warrant check before the man explained he was waiting for his wife, who was attending a luncheon inside. The country club's management confirmed the story. Kane's report claimed the man had been acting suspiciously. The man's complaint claimed Kane had profiled him. The department closed it with insufficient evidence, but noted Kane's pattern in his personnel file. The pattern was clear, the documentation was extensive, but somehow Kane remained on patrol with minimal supervision. That Saturday at 3:43 p.m., Kane received a dispatch call about suspicious activity at 2247 Waverly Road. The caller, identified as Mrs. Eleanor Briggs from 3 houses down, reported seeing an unfamiliar black woman in the pool at the Washington residence. According to the caller, the homeowner was a white woman who rarely used the pool. The black woman appeared to be trespassing. In Kane's mind, this fit his assumptions perfectly. Wealthy neighborhood, absent homeowner, black woman where she didn't belong. He didn't consider that the caller might be wrong. He didn't think about how a neighbor 3 houses away could possibly know who owned what property. He didn't verify ownership records. He just responded, convinced he was about to catch a trespasser. Kane arrived at 3:46 p.m., parked on the street, and walked up the driveway. The front door was locked. He could hear water movement from the backyard. He walked around the side of the house, opened the gate to the privacy fence, and stepped into the backyard pool area. His mind immediately filled in a narrative. Expensive home, black woman in pool, must be trespassing. He scanned the yard looking for evidence of forced entry. His eyes landed on Washington floating peacefully on the raft, sunglasses on, book in hand. In Kane's mind, that had to be the problem. He approached directly toward the pool. Do you think officers should be required to verify property ownership before making trespassing accusations? Drop your answer below. Washington was reading when she became aware of movement in her peripheral vision. She looked up and saw a young officer in full uniform standing at the edge of her pool, one hand resting on his duty belt, expression set in what he probably thought was professional authority. Step out of the pool, hands where I can see them. Washington's first reaction was confusion, then immediate recognition of what was happening. She'd spent 28 years in law enforcement. She knew exactly what this looked like. I'm sorry, what? I said step out of the pool, now. Kane's posture shifted, feet wider apart, hand moving closer to his weapon, his voice louder, more aggressive. This is my house. I live here. Washington placed her book on the raft and sat up, feet touching the shallow end. She kept her hands visible, movements slow and deliberate. She'd trained officers on de-escalation. She knew how quickly these situations could turn violent. A neighbor called about someone trespassing in the pool area. You fit the description. Kane pulled out his notebook, consulting it as if the details mattered. His eyes kept returning to Washington with suspicion that bordered on hostility. I'm not trespassing. This is my home, my pool. Washington stepped off the raft into the water, standing in the 4-foot shallow end. Water dripped from her shoulders. She made no sudden movements. She kept her voice calm, professional, controlled. The homeowner is described as a white woman in her 60s. You don't match that description. This is where assumptions become impenetrable accusations. Kane had received information from a neighbor who couldn't possibly verify ownership from 3 houses away. He'd been told the homeowner was white. Therefore, the black woman in the pool had to be trespassing. His rookie mind couldn't process the possibility that the neighbor was wrong, that ownership could change, that a black woman could own a $2.3 million estate in Lower Marion Township. The assumption calcified into fact the moment he saw her. The neighbor is mistaken. I'm Director Camille Washington. This is my residence. I've lived here for 8 years. Washington spoke with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Clear enunciation. No pleading. Statement of fact. Right. And I'm the mayor. Out of the pool. Kane's skepticism had hardened into mockery. He'd decided she was lying. Nothing she said would change his mind. I'm the director of the FBI's Philadelphia field office. My credentials are inside. I can show you proof of ownership. Washington gestured toward the house. She could see other neighbors emerging now, drawn by the commotion. A woman with a garden hose. A man walking his dog. Both staring. I don't care if you're the Queen of England. You're trespassing on private property. Get out of the pool and turn around, hands behind your back. Kane reached for his handcuffs, his face flushed with confidence. In his mind, he was about to make an arrest that would prove his competence. Officer, you are making a serious mistake. My name is Camille Washington. I am the director of the FBI's Philadelphia field office. My credentials, my driver's license, my property deed are all inside this house. If you allow me to retrieve them, I can verify everything I'm telling you. Washington's voice remained steady, but witnesses later said they could hear the warning underneath. The tone of someone who knew exactly how bad this was about to get for everyone involved. Turn around, hands behind your back. Now. Kane's hand was on his weapon now, not drawn, but ready. His eyes scanned the yard as if expecting accomplices. I am complying under protest. I am the legal owner of this property. You are violating my civil rights. There are witnesses recording this. Washington stepped out of the pool, water streaming from her swimsuit. She turned slowly, placed her hands behind her back. Kane grabbed her wrists roughly and applied handcuffs. Tight, tighter than necessary. The metal bit into her skin. She didn't flinch. She'd been trained to endure worse. You have the right to remain silent. Kane began reciting Miranda rights while Washington stood dripping wet in her own backyard, handcuffed, wearing a swimsuit. The neighbors were filming now. 3 different phones pointed at the scene. A 4th appeared in an upstairs window. The woman with the garden hose had dropped it and was recording. The man with the dog had his phone out, narrating what he was seeing for the video. That's Director Washington. She's FBI. This cop is arresting her in her own yard. Another neighbor shouted from across the fence, Officer, you're making a huge mistake. She lives here. We've seen her for years. Kane ignored them all. His face was flushed now, red from heat or embarrassment or the adrenaline of what he thought was a successful arrest. He kept his grip on Washington's arm, fingers pressing hard enough to leave marks. I am Director Camille Washington of the FBI. I have identified myself clearly. I have offered to provide credentials and proof of ownership. You are arresting me in my own home without probable cause. This is unlawful detention. Washington's voice carried across the yard, loud enough for witnesses, clear enough for the recordings, projected with the authority of someone who'd spent 3 decades commanding rooms full of federal agents and foreign intelligence officers. Save it for booking. Kane gripped her arm and began walking her toward the gate. Washington didn't resist. She knew resistance would only escalate. She'd watched too many body camera videos of people who fought back and paid with their lives. She chose documentation over confrontation, compliance under protest, survival through witnesses. I am complying under protest for the record. My attorney will be contacted immediately. Every second of this is being recorded by multiple witnesses. A teenage boy called out, "Should I call the FBI? Someone needs to tell them their director is getting arrested." Kane stopped walking for just a moment, uncertainty flickering across his face. Then he shook it off and continued toward the patrol car. I am complying under protest for the record. My attorney will be contacted immediately. Every second of this is being recorded. The man with the dog called out, "That's Director Washington. She lives here. She's the FBI director." Kane ignored him completely. He marched Washington around the side of the house, her bare feet on hot pavement, handcuffs digging into her wrists, swimsuit dripping water down her legs. Neighbors lined the sidewalk now, phones everywhere. A woman shouted that Kane was making a mistake. A teenage boy asked if he should call 911. Someone laughed in disbelief. Kane opened the back door of his patrol car and guided Washington inside with a hand on her head. He slammed the door. Washington sat in the back seat, handcuffed, barefoot, in a swimsuit, in her own driveway. Sergeant Michael Torres arrived within 7 minutes. He was a 19-year veteran who'd seen plenty of rookie mistakes but rarely one this spectacular. He pulled up behind Kane's patrol car, stepped out, and immediately assessed the situation. Patrol car in driveway, uniformed officer standing guard, crowd of neighbors filming and shouting, woman in handcuffs visible through the back window. "Kane, what's going on?" Torres approached with the expression of someone who already knew this was bad. "Trespassing arrest. Neighbor called it in. Subject refused to leave the pool, claimed to own the property." Kane stood straighter, defensive, trying to project confidence. "Did you verify ownership?" Torres glanced toward the house, then back at Kane. The caller said the homeowner is white, the subject is black. She was in the pool without permission. Kane's logic sounded even weaker out loud. "Did you check property records? Ask for ID? Verify anything before you put her in cuffs?" Torres's voice had dropped to something dangerous. "She refused to comply, Sarge. Said she was some kind of FBI director." Kane pulled out his notebook as if consulting it proved something. "She said what?" Torres went very still. "Claimed she's an FBI director. Wanted me to let her go inside to get fake credentials. Torres walked to the patrol car and looked through the window. Washington sat perfectly still, meeting his eyes. Calm, composed, absolutely furious. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Torres. Can you tell me your name?" "Camille Washington, Director of the FBI's Philadelphia Field Office. My credentials are inside the house. My property deed is in a file cabinet in my home office. My driver's license matches this address. Officer Kane arrested me for swimming in my own pool without verifying a single fact." Torres's face went pale. He turned back to Kane. "You arrested Director Washington?" "Who?" "Director Camille Washington, FBI Philadelphia Field Office. I've met her at law enforcement conferences. Twice." Torres's voice was shaking now, anger barely contained. She could be lying. People fake credentials all the time. Kane's confidence was cracking, his voice pitched higher. "People don't fake being FBI directors, Kane, and we verify before we arrest. That's basic procedure." Torres pulled out his phone and made a call. "The FBI Philadelphia Field Office Public Affairs line. A brief conversation. Confirmation within 90 seconds. Director Camille Washington, active duty. Lives at 2247 Waverly Road, Lower Marion Township." Torres hung up and turned to Kane with an expression of absolute fury barely held in check. "You arrested the director of the FBI's Philadelphia Field Office for swimming in her own pool after she identified herself, after witnesses told you she lived here, without verifying anything." "I was responding to a call, Sarge. The neighbor said." "I don't care what the neighbor said. You verify before you arrest. You check property records. You ask for ID. You use your brain." Torres unlocked the back door of the patrol car. "Director Washington, I am deeply sorry. This is inexcusable." Washington stepped out slowly. Torres removed the handcuffs. Deep red marks circled both wrists where the metal had pressed into skin. "Your apology is noted, Sergeant, but this incident will be formally documented and reported through appropriate channels. I will be filing a formal complaint against Officer Kane, the Montgomery County Police Department, and anyone in your chain of command who failed to properly train and supervise an officer with documented patterns of racial profiling." Washington's voice was ice, professional, lethal. Torres turned to Kane. "Badge and weapon. Administrative leave effective immediately. Sergeant, You just arrested a federal executive in her own backyard. You ignored her identification. You dismissed witness statements. You violated every protocol we have. Give me your badge." Torres held out his hand. Kane unclipped his badge with shaking hands and handed it over along with his service weapon. For the first time, he seemed to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. His face had gone white. His hands trembled. Should rookie officers face termination after wrongful arrests based solely on racial assumptions? Drop your answer below. Within 90 minutes, the videos had gone viral across every platform. 7 different angles from neighbors' phones. Washington identifying herself, Kane dismissing her, the handcuffs, the walk to the patrol car, a woman in a swimsuit arrested in her own backyard. The audio was crystal clear, every word documented. You could hear Washington's calm professionalism. You could hear Kane's dismissive mockery. You could hear neighbors shouting that he was making a mistake. The videos spread like wildfire. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit. Local news stations picked them up within the first hour, national networks by hour 2. By evening, it was the lead story on every cable news network. Legal analysts dissected the arrest frame by frame. Former FBI officials expressed outrage. Civil rights attorneys called it textbook racial profiling. Police reform advocates called it proof that no credential protects black people from bias. FBI director arrested in her own backyard by rookie cop swimming while black. Federal executive handcuffed in $1 million home officer arrests. FBI director, after neighbor reports. Black woman in pool cop, ignores FBI credentials, arrests. Director in her own pool, federal law enforcement leader detained for trespassing at her own residence. The outrage was immediate and explosive. The FBI issued a formal statement within 2 hours condemning the arrest and announcing a federal civil rights investigation. The statement was unusually blunt for a federal agency. The arrest of Director Camille Washington in her own home represents a profound violation of her civil rights and a disturbing example of racial profiling. The FBI will pursue all available remedies. The NAACP called for criminal charges against Kane. The National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives demanded systemic reform and Kane's immediate termination. Pennsylvania's governor issued a statement calling the incident unconscionable and promising state-level oversight. The mayor of Philadelphia, where Washington's FBI office was headquartered, called it a disgrace. U.S. senators from Pennsylvania demanded answers. The Congressional Black Caucus scheduled emergency hearings. Eleanor Briggs, the neighbor who'd called 911, refused to comment. Her house went dark, her curtains stayed closed. Online detectives identified her within hours. Her employer, a private wealth management firm, issued a statement the next morning announcing her immediate termination. Montgomery County Police Department placed Kane on unpaid administrative leave pending investigation. The department issued a public apology acknowledging the severity of the incident. Kane issued a brief statement through an attorney. "I made an error in judgment. I apologize to Director Washington." The statement did nothing to stem the fury. Director Washington contacted the ACLU and retained one of Philadelphia's most aggressive civil rights attorneys within 24 hours. The lawsuit was filed 11 days later. It named Officer Mason Kane, Sergeant Michael Torres for supervisory failure, the Montgomery County Police Department, and Montgomery County itself. The claims were devastating and comprehensive: unlawful arrest without probable cause, false imprisonment, violation of federal civil rights under 42 U.S.C., Separate 1983, racial profiling and discrimination, unlawful detention based on race, excessive use of force, tight handcuffs, unnecessary physical contact, intentional infliction of emotional distress, malicious prosecution, violation of Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable seizure, failure to train and supervise officers with documented discriminatory patterns, negligent hiring and retention, municipal liability for systemic tolerance of racial profiling. The complaint included Kane's complete 9-month record, 3 complaints over 9 months, all 3 involving black residents in affluent neighborhoods. All 3 dismissed with minimal investigation and training that changed nothing. All documented, all ignored. Montgomery County's attorneys and insurance adjusters reviewed the evidence. 7 videos from multiple angles, witness statements from 6 neighbors, FBI confirmation of Washington's identity and address, property records proving 8 years of ownership, Kane's complaint history, and Washington's credentials as a federal executive with 28 years of law enforcement experience. They reached the same conclusion within days: completely indefensible. The county settled 14 months later. $94,000 paid to Director Camille Washington, the largest civil rights settlement in Montgomery County history. The settlement included mandatory reforms, immediate suspension for any officer with 3 or more complaints related to racial profiling, mandatory property record verification before any trespassing arrest, real-time supervisory review of all arrests involving people of color in affluent neighborhoods, independent civilian oversight board with subpoena power, quarterly pattern analysis of all officer stops and arrests flagging racial disparities, and automatic state notification when any officer is placed on administrative leave for civil rights violations. Officer Mason Kane was terminated 6 weeks after the incident. The termination letter was final and comprehensive. Officer Kane arrested a high-ranking federal law enforcement official in her own home without verifying property ownership, ignored her identification, dismissed witness testimony, and engaged in racial profiling. Despite documented complaints and training interventions during his brief tenure, Officer Kane demonstrated discriminatory policing practices that violate department policy, constitutional protections, and basic professional standards. His employment is terminated immediately without appeal. Kane's name was entered into the National Decertification Index. His law enforcement career ended at 24 years old after 9 months on the job. Eleanor Briggs faced her own reckoning. Fired from her wealth management position, named in online campaigns, her home address circulated on social media. She eventually sold her house and moved out of state. She never publicly apologized. The Montgomery County Police Department faced intense scrutiny. How had Kane, with 3 complaints in 9 months, remained on patrol without additional supervision? Why hadn't the pattern triggered intervention after the 2nd complaint? What training existed to prevent officers from arresting people for existing while black in expensive neighborhoods? Internal Affairs conducted a comprehensive review. The findings were damning. 3 complaints in 9 months, all involving racial profiling, all closed with minimal investigation, training requirements completed on paper but never assessed for effectiveness, field training officers who noted concerns but took no action, and a promotional system that rewarded arrests without analyzing patterns of who was being arrested. The Department of Justice opened a pattern and practice investigation. Their preliminary findings identified systemic failures at every level of the department's complaint resolution and training systems. Should officers be automatically decertified after 3 complaints involving racial profiling? Drop your answer below. Director Camille Washington testified before the Montgomery County Board of Commissioners 8 months after the incident. The hearing room was packed. Media filled the back rows. Community activists lined the walls. Washington wore a dark suit. Her testimony was measured, powerful, and devastating. I'm a federal law enforcement executive with 28 years of experience. I've investigated organized crime, terrorism, and public corruption. I've testified before Congress. I've coordinated operations with every major law enforcement agency in this country. She paused. On June 14th, I was arrested in my own backyard for swimming in my own pool. I identified myself clearly and repeatedly. I offered to provide credentials and proof of ownership. Officer Kane refused to verify anything. He saw a black woman in an affluent neighborhood and assumed I was a criminal. My credentials meant nothing. My explanation meant nothing. The witnesses who told him I lived there meant nothing, because in his mind I couldn't possibly belong there. Her voice strengthened. Officer Kane had 3 complaints in 9 months. 3, all involving black residents in white neighborhoods. The pattern was obvious to anyone paying attention, but your department ignored it. You gave him counseling that changed nothing. You kept him on patrol with minimal supervision, and when he arrested an FBI director in her own home, you acted shocked. She looked directly at the commissioners. The settlement is $19,400. That's significant. That's accountability in financial terms. But money doesn't undo being handcuffed in a swimsuit in front of your neighbors. It doesn't restore the dignity of being marched to a patrol car in your own driveway. It doesn't erase the message that even 28 years of federal law enforcement experience isn't enough to protect you from being criminalized for existing while black in a wealthy neighborhood. Another pause. The room was silent. If this can happen to me, with all my credentials, all my authority, all my experience, what happens to black families who just moved into affluent neighborhoods? What happens to black teenagers walking dogs? What happens to black professionals who don't have FBI badges and unlimited legal resources? They get arrested, they get criminal records, they get traumatized, and your department calls it good police work. The commissioners shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke. This wasn't just about one rookie officer. This was about a system that gave him a badge, ignored 3 complaints in 9 months, and sent him into communities where his bias endangered every black resident he encountered. Washington's testimony went viral. Clips played on national news. Legal scholars cited it in law review articles. It became required viewing at police academies as an example of how systemic failure enables individual misconduct. This wasn't just about a rookie cop with bad judgment. This was about a department that ignored every warning sign. Mason Kane had shown exactly who he was in 3 separate complaints over 9 months. Every single one involved him assuming black people didn't belong in wealthy neighborhoods. Every single one should have triggered escalating intervention, counseling after complaint 1, mandatory retraining and supervisory review after complaint 2, removal from patrol pending comprehensive evaluation after complaint 3. Instead, Montgomery County gave him paperwork, training modules he clicked through without internalizing, and sent him back into the exact same communities where his bias had already caused harm. The pattern was documented. The warning signs were flashing. But the system protected him over the communities he was supposed to serve. 3 complaints in 9 months. That's 1 complaint every 3 months. That's not bad luck. That's not isolated incidents. That's a pattern of discriminatory policing so obvious it should have ended his probationary period immediately. But here's what makes it worse. Kane wasn't some veteran cop set in his ways. He was a rookie, fresh from the academy. He'd been trained on implicit bias, constitutional policing, and community engagement. He'd sat through hours of lectures on racial profiling and civil rights. He'd passed tests on Fourth Amendment protections. And within 9 months, he'd accumulated 3 complaints for the exact behavior his training was supposed to prevent. That means the training failed, or the training was ignored, or the department hired someone who couldn't be trained out of his assumptions. Either way, the system failed at multiple levels: hiring, training, supervision, and accountability. And those failures put every black resident in Montgomery County at risk every time Kane put on a uniform. Think about what had to go wrong for this arrest to happen. A neighbor 3 houses away had to call 911 about a black woman in a pool she couldn't possibly verify was suspicious. A dispatcher had to send an officer without asking basic questions like whether the caller had ever seen the homeowner. Kane had to arrive and immediately assume the worst. He had to ignore Washington's identification. He had to dismiss her offer of proof. He had to ignore witnesses. He had to apply handcuffs to a woman in a swimsuit standing in her own backyard. And he had to believe, completely and without doubt, that he was doing the right thing. That's not one person's bias. That's systemic bias operating at every level. The neighbor who assumes black people don't belong. The system that enables those calls, the training that doesn't prevent those assumptions, the supervision that doesn't catch the pattern, and the culture that validates the officer's actions until someone with power fights back. Kane's career is over. That's justice. The county paid $19,400. That's accountability. Eleanor Briggs lost her job and her home. That's consequences. But settlements don't prevent the next rookie from making the same assumptions. They don't change the culture that taught Kane to see black residents as trespassers. They don't fix the complaint system that treats each incident in isolation while ignoring the pattern. The real question is, what changes now? Does Montgomery County finally remove officers after 3 complaints instead of tolerating patterns until they arrest federal executives? Do departments finally connect the dots between complaints filed months apart by different victims about the same officer? Do we finally acknowledge that making people uncomfortable in affluent neighborhoods often means existing while black? Because if we don't fix the systems that kept Kane on patrol for 9 months despite 3 documented complaints, if we don't address the culture that taught Briggs to call 911 on a black woman in a pool 3 houses away, then we're just waiting for the next rookie officer, the next nervous neighbor, the next FBI director arrested in her own backyard, the next viral video that changes nothing. Should departments face federal oversight after settlements exceeding $10 million for civil rights violations? Drop your answer below. Comment if you believe this should be mandatory. Officers with 3 or more complaints related to racial profiling within 1 year face automatic termination and permanent decertification from law enforcement. And if you think these stories need to be told, if you believe accountability starts with exposure and change starts with public pressure, then hit that subscribe button because we're not stopping. We're going to keep exposing these patterns. We're going to keep demanding that departments treat complaint patterns as the warnings they are. We're going to keep fighting for the FBI directors, the swimmers, the joggers, the dog walkers, the ordinary people who deserve to exist in their own neighborhoods without being criminalized for the color of their skin. This isn't just about one rookie officer or one FBI director. It's about all of us and the systems we're willing to tolerate. It's about whether 3 complaints in 9 months is a pattern worth acting on, or just paperwork worth filing away until someone with power and resources fights back. Director Camille Washington fought back, and she won, but she shouldn't have had to.